In 1987, two young sisters vanished without a trace from a quiet harbor town in Maine. For 16 long years, their mother was left with only questions, until a fisherman's net dredged up a battered red tricycle from the depths of Reaper's Trench. What followed would unravel a dark web of betrayal, obsession, and unspeakable loss, and reveal that some secrets refuse to stay buried beneath the waves. The first chill of late autumn wind whipped across the gray expanse of Havenport's harbor. Seagulls cawed above, circling sluggishly in the pale morning light. Along the wharf, weathered fishermen bustled about, readying their vessels for another hard day on the water. It had been an unseasonably rough season, fish stocks declining, the currents increasingly treacherous near the outlying reefs. Among those determined few was Jacob Finley, a lean man in his early 50s, sun-warm and stoic, captain of the modest trawler Sea Whisper. That morning, Jacob had made a decision most fishermen in Havenport avoided out of sheer superstition. He would cast his nets near Reaper's Trench, a deep ravine 2 miles offshore, infamous for snaring boats and swallowing the careless. Fish had been scarce in the usual spots. The sea demanded risks now. At dawn, with a thin layer of fog hugging the horizon, Jacob had steered Sea Whisper into the open water, determined to beat the odds. The engines hummed low as the boat bobbed gently on the swells, nets trailing down into the depths. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. The radio crackled with chatter from nearby vessels, all complaining of poor catches. Jacob adjusted the throttle, hands steady on the worn wheel. Then, just past noon, the deep-sea winch groaned to life. Jacob peered over the side, squinting into the glare. Something heavy was rising in the net, not the frantic thrash of fish, but a dense, unmoving bulk. His heart picked up. Cursing under his breath, Jacob braced and reeled in the catch. The net broke the surface in a frothing spray, water cascading down its sides. Tangled in the mesh was a rusted, banacled, encrusted shape, small, vaguely familiar. Jacob blinked, frowned, and hauled it aboard. There on the deck, glistening and grim beneath layers of sea grime, lay a battered red flyer trike. The front wheel dangled askew, one handlebar bent nearly to the frame, and painted faintly along its side, beneath Corona veil, was a child's attempt at decoration, a threak of purple nail polish, worn thin by time. Jacob's breath caught. He knew this trike. Everyone in Havenport did. It had been in the missing posters for years, a haunting symbol of the town's darkest chapter. 16 years ago, Clara Whitmore's twin daughters, Emily and Nora, had vanished while playing outside on a mild spring afternoon. They had been 9 years old, one moment giggling on their driveway with that trike, the next gone. The police scoured every inch of the harbor town and its surroundings. Divers combed the shoreline, boats searched offshore. No trace had ever surfaced. Until now. Jacob staggered back, heart hammering. He wasn't a superstitious man, but there were places the sea didn't easily surrender. Reaper's Trench was one of them. His gaze dropped again to the trike, and something else caught his eye. Tangled in the net beside it, half torn and slick with algae, was a scrap of pink wool. Fumbling, Jacob pulled it free. A child's scarf, soft and small, its faded color instantly recognizable. Years ago, Clara had hand-knit those scarves for her daughters. The town had seen the photos, 2 little girls wrapped in matching pink against the coastal chill. Jacob's mind reeled. He sank onto the nearest crate, scarf trembling in his calloused hands. For a long moment, only the sea spoke, lapping gently against the hull. Finally, he reached for the ship's radio. "Havenport Coast Guard, this is Sea Whisper. I need to report something. Urgent." Static answered, then a voice broke through. "Go ahead, Sea Whisper." Jacob cleared his throat, voice rough. "I've recovered an item. A red flyer trike, possibly connected to the Whitmore case, and a child's scarf." The line went dead silent for a beat, then, "Understood, Sea Whisper. Hold position. We're dispatching a team to your location. Stay on channel." Jacob exhaled shakily, setting the scarf gently beside the trike. The sun had shifted by now, casting long shadows across the deck. Overhead, the gulls seemed eerily quiet. By the time the Gulf Guard vessel arrived, word had already begun to spread among the fleet. Fishermen stared across the waves, toward Reaper's Trench with new unease. Onshore, Detective Samuel Reed, a man who had inherited the cold case from his retired predecessor, got the call he'd long dreaded and hoped for in equal measure. Within the hour, he was racing toward the docks, heart pounding. At the same time, in a modest clapboard house on the edge of Havenport, Clara Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup cooling in her hands. The knock at her door was sharp, insistent. Startled, she turned. Two officers stood there, solemn-faced. "Mrs. Whitmore," one began, reaching his cap, "we need you to come with us to the harbor. There's been a development." Clara's world narrowed to that moment. Her pulse roared in her ears. "What kind of development?" she managed. "They've recovered something from the sea. We believe it's connected to Emily and Nora." The name still cut sharper than any blade. Her breath hitched. Without a word, cameras had been kept back. Had the harbor, cameras had been kept back, for now. But word was spreading fast. Clara stepped from the patrol car, legs trembling. Samuel Reed met her at the dock, gaze steady. "It's the trike," he said softly. "And a scarf. I thought you should see it first." Clara barely heard him. Her gaze locked on the tarp-covered shape on the pier. Hands trembling, she approached. Reed gently peeled back the tarp. The trike gleamed wetly in the sun. The purple nail polish, the bent handle, and folded neatly beside it, Emily's scarf. A sound escaped Clara's throat, half sob, half gasp. Her knees nearly buckled, and Reed caught her arm. 16 years, she whispered, eyes shining with tears. "They were out there all this time," Reed nodded. "We're reopening the case, Mrs. Whitmore. This changes everything. Someone had a boat. Someone did this." Clara straightened, grief mingling with raw determination. "Then find them," she said, "before they disappear again." As the harbor buzzed behind them, the cold case had awakened. The sea had finally spoken. Now the hunt would begin anew. Detective Samuel Reed sat alone in the dimly lit records room of the Havenport Police Department, a thin layer of dust coating the metal filing cabinets that lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of old paper and mildew. Outside, the autumn wind howled against the building's aging windows. It was well past midnight, but Reed felt no urge to go home. The recovered trike and scarf had shaken the entire town, but for him they had lit a fire that had long smoldered beneath his professional exteriore, 16 years of silence. Now the sea had finally given something back. He had to find the rest. The file on Emily and Nora Whitmore was thick and battered, the pages within yellowed with age and smeared with notes in multiple hands. Reed pulled the box toward him, flipping through old interview transcripts, evidence logs, maps of search areas long since abandoned. The case had haunted Havenport, and now it had returned with a vengeance. At 2:14 a.m., his fingers brushed against a folder wedged awkwardly between reports. He slid it free. Unsubstantiated witness statement disregarded. The label made his brow furrow. He opened it. The report inside was brief, a single page. Dated May 3, 1987, 3 days after the twins vanished. The statement had come from one Matthew Caldwell, a local dock worker known at the time for his heavy drinking and tendency to ramble. According to the document, Caldwell had approached officers claiming he'd seen a man driving a dark-colored Ford pickup near the old wharf around dusk on the day of the disappearance. He specifically mentioned seeing two young girls in the passenger seat, one in a bright red jacket, the other clutching a pink scarf. The officer's notes were curt, dismissive, no further action recommended. Reed's pulse quickened. He read it twice more. Red jacket, pink scarf, and a Ford truck. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. In 1987, the department had been understaffed, under pressure. They'd clung to leads that looked solid and brushed aside the rest, especially when sources were questionable. But now, with fresh evidence from the sea, Caldwell's words suddenly rang with chilling accuracy. Reed made a note to locate Caldwell if he was still alive. He glanced at the clock. Nearly 3 a.m. He rose stiffly, gathered the file, and made his way to the evidence room, where decades of archived material sat in rows of dusty boxes. The key was in the port's old security footage, if any of it had survived. At the time, only a handful of grainy VHS cameras had monitored the wharf. Most of the tapes had been deemed useless after the initial investigation. Still, there was one logbook entry from a retired officer mentioning that certain tapes had been boxed for longer contention disputes. Reed spent the next hour searching. Finally, at the back of a cluttered shelf, he found a battered cardboard box labeled Port Authority, 1987, Surveillance. His heart pounded as he carried it to the AV room. The department's aging VHS player wheezed to life. Reed loaded the first tape, dated April 30th, 1987, the day the twins disappeared. Static filled the screen, then cleared to reveal a jittery black-and-white feed of the harbor entrance. The footage was rough, skipping frames and distorting at intervals. Hours crawled by, in fast forward. Nothing. Dawn was breaking outside when Reed inserted the final tape marked Dockside Lot, Evening. The screen flickered. A wide-angle view of the lot unfolded, bordered by fishing vessels and storage sheds. The timestamp read 7:18 p.m. The lot was mostly empty. Then, at 7:23 p.m., a shape rolled into frame, a dark-colored pickup truck, slowing as it approached the dock. Reed leaned forward, heart thudding. The image was poor, edges blurred, but the vehicle was unmistakable. A Ford F-150 from the mid-1000s. 980, with a distinctive dent in the passenger side door. It matched the description in Caldwell's forgotten statement. The truck idled for a moment. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out, a burly figure in a fishing jacket. He glanced around, seeming to check the surroundings. Then he returned to the cab. For a brief moment, the camera caught the interior through the windshield. Two small figures sat huddled on the passenger seat. One wore a red jacket, the other, Reed froze the frame, appeared to be holding something small and pale in her lap. Scarf. His breath caught. There it was, on tape, buried all these years. He rewound, replayed the moment again and again. No clear view of the man's face, but enough to confirm Caldwell's account, and enough to narrow the suspect list. Reed immediately thought of one name, Hank Devereaux. The once prominent seafood merchant had operated a successful stall back in the day. Competitive? Bitter toward Clara Whitmore, whose expanding contracts had forced him out of prime market spots. In 1987, Hank had owned a dark blue Ford F-150, and though newer vehicles had come and gone, multiple witnesses reported seeing Hank still driving an old Ford model around town as recently as last year. Reed's mind raced. Hank had never been more than a peripheral figure in the original case, respected in the fishing community, no prior record, no obvious connection beyond professional rivalry. But now everything shifted. He grabbed his notes, dialed his chief. "We've got a break," he said. "I need surveillance on Hank Devereaux. Starting now." Dawn light spilled into the streets of Havenport as Reed prepared to track down Matthew Caldwell. He needed that witness alive. If Caldwell could confirm what was on that tape, it could finally crack the case wide open. The sea had given them the first piece. Now it was time to pull the rest from the depths. The news spread through Havenport like wildfire. By morning, the entire harbor district buzzed with whispers of the red flyer trike pulled from Reaper's Trench. Fishermen swapped theories over coffee and salt-streaked counters, old-timers shaking their heads in disbelief. The sea had finally spoken after 16 years. Clara Whitmore, wary but resolute, stood at her kitchen window, watching the fog thin over the harbor. The memory of the battered trike and Emily's pink scarf haunted her. Sleep had been impossible. Her mind churned with images of the past and questions without answers. When the phone rang, she snatched it up on the first ring. Detective Reed's voice came through, graphic rough from lack of sleep. "Clara, I thought you should know. We've recovered old footage. There's more to follow, but I'll brief you once we confirm a few things." She exhaled shakily, gripping the receiver. "What should I do in the meantime?" "Go about your routine as best you can. The harbor's going to be buzzing today. If anyone's nervous about this news, you might see it on their face." Clara swallowed hard. "You mean Hank, among others," Reed said carefully. "But yes, I've ordered discreet surveillance. Just be yourself. Watch, listen." Clara hung up and stood there a moment, heart pounding. Then she squared her shoulders and grabbed her coat. If the community was stirring, she needed to be there. The harbor was already alive when she arrived, gulls crying overhead, the scent of brine and fish thick in the air. She parked a block away and walked, her steps steady despite the tremor in her hands. It had been years since she'd set foot in the Maine fish market. Memories crowded in, early mornings setting up her stall, Emily and Nora racing through the corridors. She forced the images aside and pushed open the heavy door. The market's rhythm was as she remembered, shouted orders, knives flashing through fish, vendors battering with customers. Faces turned as Clara entered. Some nodded in quiet sympathy, others glanced away. But Clara's eyes scanned for one man. Hank Devereaux. His stall had once rivaled hers. After her contracts with upscale restaurants began pulling customers away, his resentment had grown palpable. Then the twins had vanished. Clara's grief had consumed her, forcing her to close her business. Months later, Hank had expanded into her former space. Now, 16 years on, his stall stood at the heart of the market, bashfully advertised, bustling with trade. Clara's breath caught as she spotted him. Hank was older, heavier, his dark hair thinning. He moved with the same bullish energy, barking orders to a young employee. As she approached, his gaze flicked toward her, and for a split second, froze. Clara saw it clearly. His hands hesitated over the fish he was arranging. His jaw tightened, then the mask slipped back into place. "Well, well," Hank drawled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Look who's come back to the market." Clara met his gaze evenly. "I heard about the trike," she said softly, watching his reaction. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe fear, but it vanished beneath a forced chuckle. "Everyone's talking about it," Hank said too quickly. "Damn shame, that. The sea turns up strange things." Clara didn't respond. She studied him, noting the faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite the market's chill. Hank cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "Look, Clara, after all these years, I know we weren't always friendly. But if there's anything I can do, anything, you say the word." She held his gaze, her voice steady. "You can tell me what you know." His smile faltered, eyes darting to the watching crowd. "I know nothing more than the rest. Hell, I hope they find whoever's responsible." "Damn cowards." Clara said nothing. The silence stretched between them until Hank abruptly straightened, slapping the counter. "Tell you what," he said too loudly, gesturing to a crate behind him. "I got a fresh shipment this morning. Let me send you some fish. On the house. Least I can do." Clara's heart lurched. The gesture was familiar, unsettling so. 16 years ago, the day after she closed her stall in grief, Hank had shown up at her door with a similar crate, unsolicited, an act that had felt less like kindness and more like a message. Now, here he was again. She forced herself to nod coolly. "You insist?" Hank grinned, but the strain showed around his eyes. He barked for his assistant to pack a selection. As the young man hurried to comply, Hank leaned in, voice low. "No hard feelings, Clara. We all want peace now, don't we?" She held his gaze. "I want the truth." Hank's smile twitched. "Truth's a slippery thing," he said, straightening as his assistant returned with a sealed crate. "Here you go. Enjoy." Clara took the crate, muscles taut. "Thank you," she said, her tone flat. She turned without another word, aware of the market's eyes tracking her exit. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clara walked quickly to her car, heart racing. The crate sat heavy beside her on the passenger seat. She stared at it, pulse hammering. The past was repeating itself, and this time she would not ignore the signs. She reached for her phone and dialed Reed. "I think he's nervous," she said as soon as he answered. "He just sent me a crate of fish, same as he did after I closed my stall." Reed's voice sharpened. "Keep it. Don't open it up. We'll collect it for prints and trace evidence." Clara exhaled shakily. "I think he knows the net is closing." "So do I," Reed said grimly. "Stay alert, and Clara, thank you." She ended the call and sat a moment longer, the crate a cold weight beside her. Outside, Havenport bustled, as if the last 16 years had never passed. But the sea had spoken, and so had Hank's eyes. Clara started the engine, determination burning in her veins. This time, she would not be silenced. The morning after her unsettling encounter with Hank, Clara Whitmore sat at her kitchen table staring at the untouched crate of fish Detective Reed's team had collected for processing. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, with messages from sympathetic neighbors and old acquaintances, most of which she ignored. The air inside her home felt dense with the weight of memory and the echo of Hank's forced grin. The sea might have given her a clue, but the man behind that stall still held too many shadows. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the back door, unusual enough to make her rise cautiously. Through the small window, she saw a thin, anxious figure shifting nervously. Colin Marks. The name registered instantly. A dockhand, younger than most, often worked odd hours between the fish market and one of the old cold storage facilities on the town's outskirts. Clara hesitated, then opened the door. "Colin?" she asked warily. The young man glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside. His face was pale, his eyes darting with barely contracted tension. "Which side, Mr. Whitmore? I'm sorry to bother you," he stammered, wringing his hands. "I didn't know who else to tell. I can't go to the police. Not yet." Clara closed the door behind him. "Sit down," she said quietly, her pulse quickening. "What's this about?" Colin perched on the edge of a chair, fingers trembling. He swallowed hard. "It's Hank. Something's wrong. He asked me to do something, and now with everything happening—" Clara kept her voice steady. "Start from the beginning." Colin took a shaky breath. "Last week, maybe 4 days ago, Hank cornered me down at the docks after my shift. He was jumpy, more than usual. Told me he needed a favor. He handed me a key, said it was for one of the old cold storage units out on Rikers Lane, the ones half the town forgot about after the new facilities opened. He told me to hold on to it, not tell anyone. Said he'd come for it soon." Clara's stomach knotted. "Why you?" "I worked part-time out there," Colin explained. "I've got clearance. He knew I wouldn't ask questions, or so he thought." His voice dropped lower. "But that's not all. The way he talked—" Just before he left, he muttered something. "I almost didn't catch it." Claire leaned in. "What did he say?" Claire leaned in, whispering something again, voice barely a whisper. "Gotta finish cleaning up old business?" He met Claire's widening eyes. That was 2 days before the fisherman pulled up the trike. Clara's breath caught. The words chilled her to the core. "You're sure?" "I swear it," Colin said, hand clutching the table's edge. "I didn't know what to do, then I heard about the trike, the scarf. I couldn't stay quiet. If Hank's hiding something out there—" Clara forced herself to think clearly, heart hammering. "You still have the key?" Colin nodded, pulling a small brass key from his jacket pocket. "I haven't touched it since, I swear." Clara hesitated, mind racing. Reed needed to know immediately. But if Hank suspected anything, he might move fast. She reached for her phone. "We'll call Detective Reed. You'll tell him exactly what you told me." Kala looked panicked. "Will I be in trouble?" "You did the right thing coming here," Clara said firmly. "Now let's finish it." Her fingers flew across the keypad, adrenaline surging. The phone rang once, twice, before Reed— "It's Clara. You need to get to my house. Now." She glanced at Colin, who nodded urgently. "I have someone you need to meet." Detective Samuel Reed arrived at Clara's house within minutes, tires skidding to a halt on the gravel drive. His face was drawn, eyes sharp with urgency. Claire ushered him inside, where Colin Marks sat wringing his hands, the small brass key lying between them on the table. Without hesitation, Reed sat down across from him. "Tell me everything," he said. Colin repeated his story, voice trembling but clear, as Reed recorded every word. When he finished, Reed picked up the key, weighing it in his palm. "We move now," he said, rising. "Colin, you'll come with us to identify the unit. Clara, stay here. I'll update you the moment we know more." Claire wanted to argue, but the determination in Reed's voice stopped her. She gripped the edge of the table. "Be careful." Reed gave a tight nod before hurrying out with Colin in tow. As soon as the unmarked cars arrived at the edge of Rikers Lane, the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the overgrown road. The old cold storage facility loomed ahead, its faded sign barely legible. Reed coordinated quietly with his team. 2 officers approached the rusted gate, cutting through the padlock with bolt cutters. The group moved swiftly inside, boots crunching over cracked concrete. Colin led them to the rear of the building, where a row of storage units stood forgotten. "That one," he whispered, pointing to a battered metal door streaked with rust. Reed signaled his team into position. One officer inserted the key. The lock. Reed drew his weapon. "On my count," he said. 1, 2, 3. The door swung open with a screech. The beam of flashlights pierced the darkness inside, illuminating dust swirling in the cold, stagnant air. The unit was larger than expected, the walls lined with aging shelves and broken crates. But it was the center of the room that drew every gaze. There sat an old wooden chest, large and stained, its lid closed but warped with age. A faded smear of pink paint streaked one side, a grim echo of innocence. Reed approached slowly, heart hammering. "Get the forensics kit," he ordered. An officer handed him gloves and evidence bag. With great care, Reed pried open the lid. The interior reeked of mold and neglect. Inside lay a small pile of children's clothing, yellowed and brittle with time. A tiny red jacket folded neatly beside a pink knit scarf. Beneath them, a pair of scuffed white Mary Jane shoes, one strap broken. Reed's throat tightened. No bodies, no clear trace of life. Yet the evidence screamed volumes. "Bag everything," he instructed softly. "Photograph it first." Cameras flashed in the gloom, capturing every detail. As officers moved meticulously through the unit, another called out from the far corner, "Detective, you need to see this." Reed turned, weaving through stacked boxes. The officer pointed to a weathered ledger, half buried beneath debris. Reed knelt, brushing away dust. The cover was cracked, the pages inside yellowed but intact. He flipped through entries written in a cramped, deliberate hand. Shipment dates, contents, and cryptic notes filled the columns. Then, near the back, a single line caught his eye. March 3, 1987. Fef 150/Nora Hank. The words burned into his vision. His pulse roared in his ears. This wasn't speculation, this was a record, a ledger of guilt. He took a steadying breath, snapping photographs before carefully sealing the book in an evidence bag. Rising, he addressed his team. "We've got what we need. Lock this place down, full forensic sweep." Outside, dusk had settled fully over Riker's Lane. Reed stood in the fading light, phone pressed to his ear. "Clara," he said when she answered, "we found significant evidence, clothing, shoes, a ledger entry with their names. I need you to come to the station first thing tomorrow." There was a beat of silence, then Clara's voice trembling but strong. "I'll be there." Reed pocketed his phone, gaze hardening. The noose was tightening around Hank Devereaux, and the shadows of Havenport's past were beginning to scream. Detective Samuel Reed barely slept that night. The ledger, the clothing, the shoes, proof was stacking up, but Hank Devereaux still walked free. The next morning, Reed sat in his office, mug of cold coffee untouched, reviewing every angle that was damning, but it raised new questions. Why would Hank record such a transfer? Who else had been involved? What had happened after March 3, 1987? He needed more. The phone rang. It was Officer Jenna Myers from the Harbor Unit. "Detective, you're going to want to hear this. We've got an old-timer down here, Tom Lafferty. Says he's got something to tell you. About the Whitmore case." Reed's pulse spiked. "Keep him there. I'm on my way." Within minutes, he was striding into the Harbor precinct. In the interview room, Tom Lafferty sat hunched in a chair, weathered hands clasped around a battered cap. In his late 70s now, Tom had worked the docks most of his life. His memory, they said, was sharp as a blade. Reed entered, took a seat across from him. "Tom, I appreciate you coming in. What's on your mind?" Tom's eyes were bloodshot but steady. "I heard about the trike, the scarf. Figured it was time." He took a shuddering breath. "I should have said something back then, but I was younger, stupid, afraid." Reed leaned in. "Go on." Tom's voice dropped. "Back in '87, couple days after those girls went missing, I was down by Pier 6. Late. Couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. That's when I saw Hank. He was driving that old F-150 of his, same one he still had last year, back right up to the gangplank of a small freighter, the Lady May. Belonged to his buddy, Rick Hanlon." Reed's heartbeat thudded in his ears. "You're certain it was Hank?" Tom nodded. "No doubt. I'd known him 20 years. Saw him plain as day in the dark lights. He got out, opened the passenger door, and there they were. Two little girls, one in red, one in pink. They looked scared, tired. His voice cracked. I thought, maybe it was family, didn't want her to get involved, but then Hank hustled them up that gangplank fast, like he didn't want anyone to see. Reed fought to keep his Tom calm. And the ship? You're sure it was the Lady May? Positive, Tom said grimly. She left port that night, gone before dawn. Reed's mind raced. Why didn't you tell anyone then? Tom's shoulders sagged. I should have, but Hank had friends. Rick was bad news, and back then, no one would have believed an old drunk dockhand. He looked up, tears welling. I'm saying it now. For those girls? Reed reached across the table, firm. You did the right thing coming forward. The moment he left the room, he ordered Myers to pull every record on the Lady May. Hours later, his team had a trail, thin but traceable. The ship had been sold twice after 1987, renamed with each new owner. Current registry listed it as the Helena Star, owned by one Victor Salgado, flagged in Panama but often seen along the East Coast. Reed's gut twisted. He recognized the name. Salgado had been arrested just 3 months prior in a federal sting, charged with trafficking and smuggling. Reed picked up the phone, called the FBI contact on the case. I need everything you've got on the Helena Star, he said, and on Salgado. Now. An hour later, the file landed on his desk. The details chilled him. Salgado's operation had used the freighter to move people, mostly women and children, between ports under cover of night. The timeline matched. The ship had been active since the late 80s. Reed stared at the dates. The pattern was clear. The Lady May, now Helena Star, had become a vessel of human misery, and somewhere along the line, Hank Devereaux had used it to move Emily and Nora Whitmore. The walls were closing in. Get Clara to the station, he told Myers, and notify the U.S. Attorney. We're going after him. Detective Samuel Reed stood at the edge of his office window, staring out over the gray sprawl of Havenport as the late afternoon rain began to streak the glass. His desk behind him was cluttered with files, the ledger, photos of the wooden crate with its haunting contents, transcripts of Tom Lafferty's testimony, shipping records for the Helena Star. They had a chain now, a dark, rusted chain of guilt that stretched from the docks of Havenport to the corrupt heart of the East Coast smuggling network. But it wasn't enough. They needed the living link. Emily. Where had she gone after that night? And was Nora with her? The unanswered questions weighed heavier than the evidence. His phone rang, cutting through the murk of his thoughts. On the other end, Special Agent Laura Breckman from the FBI task force assigned to the Helena Star sounded urgent. Detective, we've got something. You need to see it. An hour later, Reed was in a secure video conference with Breckman and her team. The FBI had traced the Helena Star's last few known routes prior to Salgado's arrest and found records from a small fishing village in Nova Scotia, Canada. There's a witness, Breckman explained, eyes sharp. Woman named Maria Gauthier. In 2001, she worked at a remote coastal diner near Shelburne, claimed she met a girl, maybe 16, 17, who introduced herself as Emily Whitmore. Reed's heart kicked hard. Are you sure? We checked, Breckman said. Gauthier described the girl in detail, tall, dark blonde hair, blue eyes, said she was withdrawn, cautious, but seemed desperate for kindness. She mentioned escaping from a man named Hank. The name sent a chill through the room. Breckman continued. Gauthier didn't know the full story back then, but when news broke about Salgado and the Helena Star, she put two and two together and contacted us. We interviewed her thoroughly. She's credible. Reed leaned forward. Any records? Proof? Breckman nodded. Even better. Gauthier had a disposable camera that she used at the diner. Tourists, regulars. She kept her photos. Among them was a candid shot from the summer of 2001. In the background, clear enough to see, is the girl she believes was Emily. The screen blinked, and the image appeared. Reed sucked in a breath. The photo showed a sunlit patio behind the diner, tourists seated at metal tables. Off to one side, half turned toward the camera, was a young girl. She wore a faded hoodie, strands of blonde hair scaping the hood, blue eyes shadowed beneath war-weariness. That made Reed's chest tighten. We ran the image through facial recognition software, Breckman said, compared it to school photos of Emily Whitmore from 1986, adjusted for aging. She tapped a key. A side-by-side image appeared. The software marked key points, cheekbones, jawline, brow, eye spacing, with percentage matches. Result? 85% probability, high enough to pursue. Reed exhaled slowly, pulse racing. That was in 2001, he said. Any sign of her since? Breckman's face tightened. That's the problem. The girl stayed in Shelburne for about 2 weeks, according to Gauthier. Then she vanished. No employment records, no school enrollment. We've checked local shelters, hospitals, nothing. It's like she disappeared again. Reed's mind reeled. 16 years old in 2001 would make her 26 now. Was she alive? Was Nora? Had Hank kept chasing them all these years? Or had someone else taken over where he left off? He straightened. I want everything you've got. Witness interview, raw photo files, location reports. We're reopening this angle. Breckman nodded. We'll send it immediately. And detective, if she's alive, she's been running a long time. Be ready. Reed ended the call and sat back, head spinning. A new lead. A living thread. Emily had made it out, at least once. Now he had to find where that thread led next. Detective Samuel Reed barely paused after the conference call with the FBI. The lead from Canada had injected new urgency into the case. Emily had been alive, had escaped for a time, but there was no certainty about her fate or Nora's. He needed to tighten the net around Hank Devereaux. If the man had orchestrated the girls' disappearances, the evidence would be in the details, small cracks that even Hank's bravado couldn't patch. Reed called in his team and issued the next round of orders. We're going deep, he told them. Financials, communications, associates, everything from the 80s through now. If Hank so much as sneezed suspiciously, I want it documented. Officer Jenna Myers and forensic accountant Alan Trent began combing through decades of Hank's financial history, pulling records from old bank archives and cross-referencing them with major events in the case time. By noon the following day, Trent entered Reed's office with a stack of printouts. You'll want to see this. Reed waved him in, eyes narrowing. Trent spread out the papers, tapping one highlighted section. March 2nd, 1987, Hank withdrew $20,000 in cash from his personal account. No corresponding business expense, no major purchase that matches, just gone. Timing? 1 day before the ledger entry, Trent confirmed grimly, and 3 days before Tom Lafferty saw Hank at the docks with the girls. Reed stared at the figure. $20,000 in cash wasn't casual. In the 80s, it was a fortune. A payment, a bribe, a piece of the operation they had only begun to uncover. He rubbed his jaw. Anything else? Odd pattern, Trent added. Smaller withdrawals in the weeks following, 500 here, 1,000 there, consistent with payments to multiple parties or hush money. Reed nodded. Good. Keep digging. The financial link added another brick to the growing wall of evidence, but Reed wanted more. He turned his attention to an old piece of the puzzle that had nagged at him for weeks, the original tapes of dockside radio chatter from the Harbor Authority. Most had been logged and dismissed in '87, but technology had improved. He ordered the tapes digitized and ran them through modern audio enhancement software. The process took 2 days. Late on the second night, Reed sat blary-eyed in the department's AV room, headphones clamped tight, listening to the filtered files. Static hissed and popped between bursts of garbled voices. Then, at 1:43 a.m. on the tape marked March 4th, a fragment caught his ear, mid-conversation, partially masked by interference. He replayed it, fingers trembling. The software flagged key frequencies and isolated the voices. Reed leaned in, breath shallow. The words became clearer. One voice, low, gruff, Hank Devereaux's unmistakable timbre. Another voice, muffled, unidentified. You sure about this? The second voice asked. Hank's reply was chilling in its casualness. Yeah, the girls are taken care of. Now it's your turn. Reed's blood iced over. He rewound, played it again. The words were deliberate, the implication unmistakable. Hank had completed his part of the transaction. What remained was for his partner, likely someone tied to the Lady May or the broader trafficking network. The recording was old, imperfect, but admissible. With expert analysis, it would hold. Reed rose from his chair, fire burning in his veins. Hank had left a thread. Now they would pull it tight. Detective Samuel Reed barely paused after the recovered audio tape was confirmed and archived as evidence. The words Hank had spoken haunted him, but they also provided momentum. The next morning, as he reviewed reports, his phone rang. It was taut with urgency. "We've traced the lead from Shelburne further," she said. "One of our contacts flagged a phone number linked to a known associate of Salgado's. That number recently pinged a tower near a remote town in Ontario, Fairview, population under 2,000. Reed sat up straighter. "And?" "We cross-referenced local lodging records," Breckman continued. 2 weeks ago, a woman checked into a rundown motel under the name Emma White. The clerk described her as a young woman in her mid-20s, nervous, traveling with an older man. The description matches Emily Whitmore's profile almost exactly. Reed's heart pounded. "Have you confirmed it's her?" "Not 100%, but strong enough to act," Breckman said. "We've secured warrants. Ontario Provincial Police is prepping a tactical team. We're moving in within the hour." "I want to be there," Reed said without hesitation. Breckman paused. "We can have a flight waiting, but it'll be tight." "Do it," Reed ordered. "And Laura, get her out safe." The flight from Maine to Ontario felt endless, each mile a weight pressing harder on Reed's chest. Upon landing, he was rushed to the OPP command post outside Fairview. The air was cold and sharp, snow dusting the pine-linked roads. Inside the makeshift command center, Breckman briefed him quickly. "The motel's isolated, 3 miles off the main highway, only 5 occupied rooms. Our target is room 4. Photos flashed on the screen, grainy surveillance stills of a gaunt young woman stepping outside briefly, accompanied by a stocky, gray-hailed man. Back based on intel, he's a mid-tier enforcer in Salgado's network, likely controlling her. Reed's jaw tightened. "And Emily?" "Looks scared, withdrawn, but alive." The tactical plan was swift and precise. Pre-dawn, under cover of darkness, unmarked vehicles surrounded the motel. Reed watched from a command van, adrenaline spiking. Through night vision feeds, he saw the team stack at the door of room 4. On the command, they breached. Shouts echoed through the radio. "Police! Answer, we can see them!" Moments later, the feed showed officers escorting out the older man in cuffs, face bloodied from resistance. Then a smaller figure emerged, shielded by 2 officers, disheveled, shaking. Reed's breath caught. It was her. The image from the Shelburne photo had aged into a wary young woman, her eyes hollow but defiant. Emily Whitmore. Reed rushed to the perimeter as she was brought to an awaiting ambulance. When the door opened, their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. "Are you Detective Reed?" He nodded, voice steady. "Yes." "You're safe now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she squared her shoulders. "I need to tell you about Nora." Reed's throat tightened. In the warmth of the ambulance, as medics checked her vitals, Emily began to speak, her words trembling but determined. Hank, he kept us locked away after that first trip on the boat," she said, voice cracking. "Different places, sometimes we'd be moved, sometimes left alone. Nora always protected me, always." She swallowed hard. "When we were 13, she tried to get us out. We had a plan. She made it to the door, but Hank caught her." Emily's face crumpled, tears falling freely. He killed her. I heard her scream. I heard him say she wouldn't be a problem anymore." Reed clenched his fists, voice gentle. "Emily, I'm so sorry." She shook her head, wiping tears. "I've carried it for so long, I thought if I stayed quiet, he wouldn't come for me next. But when I saw news about Salgado, I knew it was time." Reed placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than enough. We're going to take him down. For Nora. For you." Emily nodded, tears streaming, a fragile resolve flickering in her exhausted gaze. Detective Samuel Reed stood in the observation room of the Havenport Police Department, eyes fixed on the interrogation feed as Hank Devereaux was led into the small interview room, wrists shackled, face sullen. It had taken a week to extradite Hank from Ontario after the evidence against him became undeniable. Ledger entries, audio tapes, financial records, and most damning of all, Eleanor Whitmore's harrowing testimony. Hank had been arrested without incident, but the venom in his glare spoke volumes. Clara Whitmore sat beside Reed, pale but composed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had insisted on being present, not for vengeance, but for truth. Inside the room, Detective Myers began calmly. "Mr. Devereaux, you understand the charges against you?" Hank snorted, leaning back. "I understand this witch hunt." Myers remained unshaken. "You're facing multiple counts of abduction, conspiracy, and homicide. We have enough evidence to convict, but we want your full account." Hank's gaze flickered toward the mirrored wall. Reed knew he understood Clara was watching. There was a long pause before Hank spoke, voice low. "It was never supposed to go this far." Myers leaned in. "Explain." Hank exhaled bitterly. "You want the truth? Fine. In '87, my life was falling apart. My father's business, 3 generations of Devereaux fishermen, was on its knees. Then along comes Clara, with her fancy contracts, her pristine stall, signed an exclusive with that damn Boston restaurant group. My buyers vanished overnight." His knuckle whitened against the table. "We were drowning. My wife left. My son, he wouldn't speak to me, and everyone praised Clara like some queen of the docks." Myers pressed. "So you decided to take her daughters?" Hank's eyes darkened. "At first it was leverage. I knew a man, Rick Hanlon. He had connections. Said he could move things quietly. The plan was simple. Make her desperate, ruin your reputation when she failed to protect her own." Clara flinched, tears welling. Hank sneered. "But it spiraled. Rick saw other opportunities. Said there was money in it. By then, I was in too deep. Couldn't back out." "You killed Nora." Hank's jaw twitched. That wasn't planned." "The girl tried to run. Nearly exposed everything. Rick made it clear. No witnesses, no liabilities." He looked away, voice hollow. "I did what had to be done." The room fell silent. Reed watched Clara, her face pale with grief, but unbroken. Myers continued. "And the money? The withdrawals?" Hank gave a bitter laugh. "Blood money. Paid Rick. Paid the others. Bought my silence, their loyalty." Myers leaned forward. "Why confess now?" Hank's eyes flicked to the mirrored wall again. "Because it's over. You have her. You have the tapes, the books." He smirked coldly. "And because Clara deserves to know." Clara stiffened, her breath catching. Hank's gaze seemed to pierce through the glass. "You always wondered why, didn't you? It wasn't just business, Clara. It was watching you rise while I sank. Watching you smile at the market while my life burned. Fair contract. You killed my family long before I touched yours." Reed clenched his fists, barely restraining himself. Myers's voice remained steady. "One last question. Is there anything else we need to find?" Hank leaned back, a slow, malicious grin spreading. "There's more waiting down at the bottom of Reaper's Trench. But that's not my story to tell anymore." The words hung in the air, chilling the room. In the observation bay, Clara shuddered. Reed placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Hank was led away, conviction certain, but the shadows of his deeds would linger. As Clara rose, tears streaming but chakra squared, Reed knew this was not the end, but for the first time in 16 years, it was the beginning of truth. They stepped into the dawn light together, carrying with them a story of darkness, loss, and the fragile but enduring hope of justice. If you've followed this story all the way to the end, take a moment to tell us, what part shocked you the most? And where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It really helps us bring more of these hidden truths to light.